Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. So, this episode is going to be all about the 2024 MotoGP season, and it's mainly aimed at people who are, new to MotoGP after a quick refresher of the weekend format, the teams and things like that, or if you're just like me and desperate to talk or think about MotoGP, because we're in the off season. It feels like it's been ages since bikes have been on track, and although it's less than a month until the Sepang shakedown, I feel that's not soon enough. Although, that being said, I'm loving this wholesome family vibe content that we're getting out of the riders at the moment on their social medias. So yeah, we've got 22 races this season. That's an awful lot of races. So I know that my life is going to be completely absorbed by racing this year. So given the fact we have so many races this year, I have actually been out and being social, which is very unlike me. And anyone that knows me in real life will be like, Kate, you call that social? But I have ventured outside of my local area a few times, which has been lovely. But I'm still thinking about MotoGP, which is what, spurred me to create this episode. That and the fact I was looking at who is Lewis going to pick as his 2024 prediction. So what I'm going to do is print out little photos of each of the riders, and then I will unleash my dog on those photos, and whoever he steps on first or something similar will be his prediction for the MotoGP 2024 season. And you can do with that information what you wish. But it was in that, when I was looking at printing out the riders, that I realised how many riders had switched teams, which is bizarre because it was not a silly season. This year's the silly season, which I'm already excited about. So it'll just be, I suppose, another aspect, another dynamic to watch of all the moving parts and seeing how many riders, if any, are going to stay. I mean, I suppose other than Brad Binder and Luca Marini and Johann Zarco, actually. We know they've all secured multi-year deals. So we can assume they'll stay put. And I have to say assume because Marc Marquez stepping on a Gresini Ducati this year shows that assumption, what's that saying? Assumption makes an ass out of you and me. That is specifically what comes to mind when I'm like, yeah, Brad Binder will still be on a KTM next year. Who am I kidding? This is MotoGP. We just honestly don't know anything. But that's enough of a rambling introduction. Let's jump into the episode, starting with the weekend format. So the qualifying format for all classes, as in Moto3, Moto2 and MotoGP, is now all the same, at least as far as I'm aware. I haven't double-checked the rules prior to recording this episode, but I'm fairly confident. Fairly confident. But the format is as follows. We start on Friday with free practice. So this is a time for teams and riders and everyone involved, I suppose, to test their setups, check what's working, check what's not working, all of that hurrah and things. So hopefully they'll be testing tyres, because goodness knows those Michelin tyres need testing. Whatever new tyre that has been promised for 2025 desperately needs testing. Hopefully they're going to use free practice to do that. Up next is practice 1. So think of this as like a pre-qualifying, because the fastest 10 riders from practice 1 on a Friday automatically gain a place in qualifying 2. So that's Q2. So they don't have to worry about qualifying 1, which is using another tyre. It's putting more strain and stress on all aspects from the team to the rider, and that is qualifying 2. So that's your Friday. You've got free practice 1 and then pre-qualifying? Let's call it that. Pre-qualifying, practice 1, That is your Friday track action, I suppose. Saturday, we have free practice 2. And so again, time for riders and teams to test things, do some setups. If you weren't in that top 10 on practice, you'd be sort of getting ready for Q1. Directly following is qualifying, and so you have Q1 to start, which is where the fastest 2 riders will progress into Q2, which Q2 defines the start of the grid, so from P1 to P12. Q1, which is what the bottom half of the grid is set by, that defines riders from the 13th to the 22nd place. So it's really when action starts to ramp up. So you want to see really good pace. You want to see a little bit of spicy drama. Naturally, Marc Marquez will probably be following Pecco Bagnaia, which is just so, like, juicy and entertaining. I love it. But that's qualifying. And it's part of why we love this sport, because you can watch on a Saturday, on a Friday, and everything counts into whatever the weekend.
Look at his face. Look at his face.
And it just adds so much more excitement to the weekend with this qualifying format, in my opinion. But one thing I want to note is this weekend format does miss something very, very important. And while I love the addition of sprint races, kind of, part of me does think that it's far too much for the riders to take on, and the teams, and the logistics is an absolute nightmare. What comes after qualifying is the sprint race, and the addition of the sprint races into every weekend, I don't mind, but what I absolutely disagree with is the fact that we have had to cancel Moto3 and Moto2 warm-up on the Sunday for the sprint race. I think, well, actually no, it's not even for the sprint race that we've had to cancel it. It's because of that silly riders parade, which I admit has its place in our sport and we desperately need this fan interaction. But the fact that we've had to cancel Moto3 and Moto2 warm-up, these are kids, basically. I say that as a 30-year-old woman, but they're young people who need all that track time they can get because they're about to go real fucking fast, real quick around a racetrack. Basically just bring back Moto2 and Moto3 warm-up and I wouldn't have to have this rant. And yet here I am, ranting away. Back to my topic at hand. We have the sprint race. So the sprint race is half the distance of your regular Grand Prix race, and it can vary. So if a Grand Prix race on the Sunday is scheduled to be 22 laps, the sprint will be 11 laps. So it's half that, and it does contribute towards the World Championship points. So sprint points are scored by the top 9 finishers, and it goes 12 points for P1, 9 points for P2, 7 points for P3, and then just -1 until you get to 0. So it's only the top 9 finishers that get points. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not entirely sure of the decision that I think should happen here. I know people love them, I know people hate them. I'm very much in the way that, oh my gosh, they take up even more of my time. I mean, yes, I was watching the racing anyway. Yes, I was, committed to this sport. But the fact remains that while it's bringing some new fans in and getting boots on the ground, as it were, we're getting people through the gates on Saturdays a lot more than we would on a Sunday. To me, it sort of dilutes the product a little bit, because we love Grand Prix racing, Formula 1, MotoGP, whatever you watch, the prototype racing, that style of thing. The sprints to me dilute it. They make it a little bit cheaper, as it were. And I guess that's the vibe. Don't get me wrong, I still watch them and I still love them and they're addictive and they hit that sweet, sweet dopamine spot in my brain that's like, yes, this is entertaining, it's exciting, it's, to me, the pinnacle of motorsport, MotoGP, because it's constant action, and the sprints have given me that long-term action and sort of condensed it into 20 minutes rather than 40. And so if I was just looking for that particular aspect of a sport, I'd be so excited. The problem is I'm not looking for that particular aspect of this sport. I want the whole package. I want the 40 minutes of Grand Prix racing, which comes on the Sunday rather than the Saturday. So to clarify, on Friday we have free practice 1, practice 1. On the Saturday we have free practice 2, qualifying, and the sprint race. So on Sunday, what we have for MotoGP, we have the warm-up. So that's basically a time for the riders to test the conditions, see what's going on, see where the wind's at, for them basically to be human and use their senses to figure out what they need to do later in the day, which is why I think we should really bring it back for Moto3 and Moto2, because it's such a important human part that I think we just really need. Following warm-up, we have the races. So for the weekend as a whole, it generally goes Moto3, then Moto2 and MotoGP, and whatever support classes are there, be that Red Bull Rookies Cup, I think it's called, or the Asia Talent Cup, Oceanic Cup. Actually, I don't know if we got a cup. What I mean is, that's the general format. So we'll generally start on a Sunday with the Moto3 race, then we'll start with the Moto2 race, and then we will go into the MotoGP Grand Prix race. So that's the weekend format as a whole. It's simple while still being complex. It's interesting, and it takes up far too much of my social life. So moving on to the riders and the teams, because they're basically entwined. With the teams, you have so many aspects, and as I said at the start of the podcast, there are so many moving pieces, and people have swapped teams this season when it wasn't a silly season. So after I've discussed the teams, I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the stories and outline some of the things that will be so interesting to me and what I really hope people enjoy this side of the sport as well. So like the stories is what I'm saying. So we're talking the Grassini project, and we're talking Trackhouse Racing and what they're bringing in, because the first team I'm going to discuss is Aprilia Racing. So they didn't have any movers or any shakers at a factory level, that is. So in the team we have Maverick Vinales, who is running number 12, and Alicia Spargo, who is running number 41. So that is the factory team. The satellite team for Aprilia, so running Aprilia machinery, and we know now factory spec materials, basically. So while Raul Fernandez, who is running 25, is not going to be on a factory chassis immediately, he is going to be running a factory spec engine. Miguel Oliveira, who is running number 88, he will be on a factory spec chassis, a factory spec engine. He's basically getting the same machinery, the entire complete package, the same as the factory, which is very exciting. I do believe, and this is just my assumption, that Trackhouse Racing wanted it for both pilots. However, Aprilia just did not have the resources due to the tight time frame of the turnaround, basically. Because the Aprilia situation, the satellite team, was a bit of a mess coming into Valencia last year. So that's Aprilia summed up in a very small moment. Next up, we're going to talk about Ducati Lenovo factory team. So they will be running Pecco Bagnaia under number 1. His actual name's Francesco Bagnaia, I believe, but we all call him Pecco. It's his nickname. It works. And then running number 23 is Enea Bastianini. His nickname actually is the Beast. And I think that's going to be such an interesting dynamic this year because of how injured Enea was last year. and hopefully there's a lot more competition within that particular team. The satellite teams for Ducati are numerous. So to start, we have Pramac Racing, which this year has number 21 Franco Morbidelli and number 89 Jorge Martin. So they basically run factory spec bikes. So not year-old bikes, they're pretty much up there with the factory team. Next up for Ducati satellite teams is Gresini Racing. Gresini Racing this year is the host to number 73 Alex Marquez and his brother number 93 Marc Marquez. This story just writes itself, and it's possibly, in fact, no, it is the biggest potential story of 2024, that Gresini Racing team. But that's not the last satellite team. So Gresini will be on 1-year-old Ducati bikes, so the 2023 model, the 2023 specs, the engine, that sort of thing. The other team running those same bikes and those same specs are the, I'm going to butcher this, so I apologize in advance, it's the Patinma Enduro VR46 racing team. It's Vale's team. So they're going to be having number 49 Fabio Di Giannantonio and Marco Bezzecchi. I'm going to be referring to Fabio Di Giannantonio as Digia. I love that nickname, mainly because it's a lot less syllables than his actual name, and wherever I can cut corners on speaking, I generally choose to do so. So this team's always quite wholesome. I think this pairing's going to be, I don't know, quite fun. Sort of like the KTM vibes, who I will get to momentarily. But let's talk about Repsol Honda. So this is another factory team, and this year they will be running number 10 Luca Marini, who is one of VR46's or VR46. Either way, he's one of their prodigies, and it'll be really interesting to see what he can bring to Honda. Across the garage from him is going to be number 36, Joan Mir. Also a very exciting prospect, especially when you have a development rider and more of a wholesome environment rather than, while I admit I am a self-admitted Marc Marquez fangirl, let's face it, he can be a toxic douchebag. So having Luca Marini and Joan Mir together is more wholesome. I'm hoping it's a healthier team dynamic, I suppose, and it gives me a lot more hope for Honda as a whole. The satellite team for Honda is LCR, and they have some great riders. They've got Joan Zarco, who will be running number 5, and they have number 30, Taka Nakagami, which I know I butcher that every time. Is it Takaki Nakagami? I'm not too sure. I'm really working on my pronunciation and names. I'm trying very, very hard. It's like going hand in hand with my Terreo Maori courses and my Italian courses. So I'm just hoping it all loops up together in my brain at some point and I just start pronouncing everything flawlessly. But considering I still can't pronounce giraffe, you know, the tall animal, giraffe with like the long neck, I know it's like giraffe, but I just can't process it out of my mouth. And that is a tangent. Let's get back to MotoGP with Red Bull KTM Factory Racing. So they have perhaps the riders I enjoy the most dynamically. So their relationship as a team and the riders they are promoting up through, they're the spicy ones. They're the rubbing is racing kind. The first of them is number 33, Brad Binder. The second is our Australian favourite. Admittedly, he's the only Australian on the grid, so if we had 2, he might not be the favourite. He probably still will be, though, because it's just so wholesome. It's number 43. It's Jack Miller. They have a satellite team, KTM, and it is Tech 3 Gas. So this year they have the rookie and the only rookie on the grid, running number 31, Pedro Acosta. Across the garage from him is what was last season's only rookie, number 37, Augusto Fernandez. like I said, I just love the vibes of this team and the whole KTM garage and the project. I may be a little bit biased, as I do ride a KTM, but I've also ridden an Aprilia and a Yamaha, so I'm not overly biased, but I'm probably biased enough that I'm mentioning it right now. So I suppose that is sort of the package of MotoGP. That's the initial overhaul. I could go into so many more details, like the management changes and things like that, but that would have me sitting here talking until sometime in June, I imagine, and by then it's all going to have changed anyway, because that's the beauty of prototype racing. There are so many moving parts, there are so many trials, there are so many features that become apparent, and it's why I watch every single weekend. But before I do that, I'm just going to take a step, take a moment, crack myself another lemonade, and then I will be discussing the story lines that I think we should all watch out for and what really interests me coming into 2024, which we are actually in now. And this is going to be kind of related to silly season, I suppose, kind of not. It's just these extra moments that I think we should be watching out for this year. What is potentially the biggest story of 2024 is the possibility that comes with Marc Marquez moving to Gresini Ducati. I'm putting it in podcast form as, if you're a regular in the Discord server, you know already that when Marc Marquez wins his next race, and I'll define it as a sprint victory or a Grand Prix victory, I am getting his number tattooed on my body, and I'll post pictures. I'll post pictures on the YouTube channel, I'll post them on my socials. This is potentially one of the best comebacks in sporting history. I hope, obviously, being that Marc Marquez fangirl, that it happens and this package comes together and it works and he gets some victories. He even has the potential to fight for the World Championship because the Ducati really is that good. We saw Marco Bezzecchi stay in the World Championship title fight until the very late stages of 2023. Even the only part, I suppose, that knocked him completely out of the contention is the fact that he got a broken collarbone at the ranch, which is where the VR46 Academy boys all train. And that was like a defining moment in his season. So seeing what Marc Marquez can do on that Ducati is so interesting. This is the guy who came into MotoGP and won as a rookie. He is that level of talented. He's self-admittedly back to full fitness after his 2020 injury, which was a broken arm followed by numerous issues regarding the surgery and just all aspects of that. So if Marc Marquez, number one, if he wins another race, that's exciting. If he wins the World Championship, everyone can just go home for 2025 because he will be back, and that just really excites me. Not only does Marc Marquez being on a year-old Ducati excite me, the prospect of where he could be in 2025 excites me quite a lot. And the reason for this is because he has Red Bull sponsorship. He's taken away that Red Bull sponsorship from Repsol Honda. This probably wasn't an intentional move on his part because he self-admittedly just wants to win. And all these other aspects of it that flow around him because of his sheer raw talent, that sort of talent that we have Pedro Acosta possibly bringing into the field as well. There's just, yeah, sorry, I was just in awe for a moment there at the pure talent that these guys that ride around at 300 plus kilometers an hour, it's just bizarre and bonkers to me. But where Marc Marquez places on the grid in 2025 is interesting because we know he loves Honda. He lives and breathes for this sport, and he wanted to stay with a single manufacturer for his entire career. That's what he wanted to do, and we saw these heartbreaking scenes at Valencia where he was upset, the team was upset. As a fan, it ripped my heart out watching him so sad. But will he go back to Honda in 2025? We simply don't know. We don't know what the terms of his contract negotiations were, because to break what was allegedly a $19 million contract is not a small deal. And to take, Red Bull sponsorship with you, also not a small feat, I suppose, which then opens the door to KTM, Red Bull KTM Racing. This is where I think we could see Mark going if he doesn't go back to Honda. And then there's also that aspect of the fact that he could go to Factory Ducati. Factory Ducati, with their Monster Energy and Lenovo branding, the logistics and the backroom conversations that would have to happen for that to happen would be so interesting. And so that is without a doubt the potential biggest story of 2025, where Marc Marquez will go, what he will be doing, which makes it also the potential biggest story of 2024. And I apologize if you can hear my dog right now. He's on my lap, and it is a stinking hot day here in New Zealand. It's, what's the time now? 11 a.m. and it's already 24 degrees according to my thermostat. So we went out for walkies this morning and we were like roasting, and this is 8 a.m. or so, and he's just been asleep since we got back and he's just woken up. So if you can hear rustling and moving, that is what it is. But as I was saying, not talking about my dog, Lewis, who is named after Lewis Hamilton, so it's kind of all related in my life. But we were talking about Marc Marquez, who I do sort of put on the same level as Lewis Hamilton. Anyway, I digress. One person I think will be incredibly interesting to watch, and possibly the straw that breaks the camel's back. The chips that fall first. And I don't mean chips from the Discord server. I just mean, metaphorically. That person is Aleix Espargaro. Is he going to stay in MotoGP? It's entirely up to him and his choice, which is really cool. But it's also... I love Aleix Espargaro. I love all the riders. We know this. And he's still winning races, and I know he still wants to be in the sport. But we just have so much talent and so many interesting things that could happen if he was to move into management and go off to cycle the Tour de France or something similar. One of those will be Jorge Martin and Fabio Quartararo. Which of those riders would go for that seat? Would either of them go for the seat? Would Miguel Oliveira move up? There's so many interesting aspects and potential. And the Aprilia project, maybe it's because my first bike was an Aprilia, maybe it's because it's such an interesting prospect at the moment, the development of such a small, I suppose, boutique Italian team and what they can do and what they are potentially going to do and how close they are to Ducati. They're debatably the second best bike in the 2023 season. It's them and KTM are the second runners. So they just need, I suppose, the pinnacle. They just need a rider who is going to give them a world championship, much like KTM do. And no offense to Aleix Espargaro, Maverick Vinales, Raul Fernandez, or Miguel Oliveira, I don't think those are the riders that are going to win them a world championship. I do think they are all incredibly integral parts to the MotoGP Aprilia project, but we see the same at KTM. We know Jack Miller has brought so much to that project, mainly because of his years at Ducati and his skill and experience in that sense, but we also need to admit that he's probably not going to be a world champion. And while I desperately want Brad Binder to take the MotoGP World Championship in 2024, even though I know I'm like this massive Marquez fangirl, having Brad Binder win the World Championship would just be so much more interesting to me. Anyway, that is. So, if Alicia Spargo retires, who replaces him is going to be the start of silly season, I think. Because we know Fabio Quartararo, which is another story to watch. We've got an incredibly talented world champion in the same kind of talent as Marc Marquez. Possibly Marc Marquez's biggest rival on the grid at the moment, even though Pecco Bagnaia is the world champion. Seeing what Fabio Quartararo is going to do in 2025 is just interesting. And seeing if he stays at Yamaha in 2024 will say a lot about the Yamaha project and what is their potential. Because another thing to watch in 2024 is Yamaha itself as a whole. Are they going to pick up VR46 as a satellite team? Are we going to be seeing 4 Yamahas back on the grid in 2025? But clearly, the most obvious thing to watch in 2024 is my battle with Dorna. And yes, that is basically a shitpost in podcast format. So, for those of you who don't know, I am constantly getting DMCA requests, copyright takedowns from Dorna, and I fight them each and every single time. It's exhausting, but I feel like the spreading of content, just short clips, is part of how we grow this sport and how we move forward with the sport. So that is definitely going to be something I continue to do in the hope that when I edit these, you guys can have videos, showing some of the weekend action. 5-second videos, 10-second videos. I'm easy breezy. Dorna just need to, give guidelines about what people can do, and then people will just talk about and ramble about the sport more. But yes, that is definitely an interesting topic for 2024. All of these little stories and interesting aspects are just part of what makes MotoGP interesting, and the logistics and everything that goes into these weekends to get these bikes going around in circles. Admittedly, they're wiggly, elevation changey, exciting circles, but all of these aspects are so curious, and I'm just really, really looking forward to the 2024 season. So do let me know what stories you're looking forward to, because I will be here rambling every single week, every Monday, because I am consistent. At least I try and be consistent. I am definitely here every Monday rambling either way. So you have a lovely week, and I will be here next week. Have a great week.